My sister kicked me out of her house because I won an architectural award. She claims it sets unrealistic expectations for her kids. This came after I refused to fund their private school tuition and instead invested in my own design studio. I never thought I'd be starting over at 35, rebuilding not just my career, but my entire family dynamic. 3 years ago, my life felt complete with Nathan by my side. He was everything I could have dreamed of, a brilliant architect by day, a talented jazz pianist by night, and the most gentle soul you'd ever meet. We'd been together for 5 years, and I was certain we'd grow old designing beautiful spaces together. Nathan loved his vintage Porsche. I used to tease him about being a weekend racer, trading his drafting tools for driving gloves whenever he could. But that's what made him Nathan, this perfect balance of precision and passion. That morning was like any other. He kissed me goodbye, grabbed his keys, and headed out for a quick drive before our client meeting. He never made it to the office. A delivery truck ran a red light, and just like that, my world shattered into a million pieces. The first few months after the accident are still a blur. I threw myself into my architectural projects, taking on every competition I could find just to keep my mind occupied. My sister, Victoria, despite her usual judgmental attitude, actually helped me through those initial weeks. She'd bring her boys, Lucas and Marcus, to my house, and their presence somehow made the emptiness feel a little less overwhelming. For 3 years, I lived in this strange limbo, not really dating, not really living, just designing spaces for other people's lives, while my own felt frozen in time. My work as an architect kept me busy, and I made good money, enough to help Victoria with her mortgage payments since she's been struggling after her divorce. A week ago, last week, his old college friends came over. We do this sometimes. Gather in my self-designed living room, share memories, laugh about our student days. James, who now runs his own architecture firm, looked around my modern open-concept space. Remember how Nathan would always say, "Architecture is frozen music?" James mused, running his hand along the minimalist fireplace Nathan and I had designed together. That's when it hit me. I needed to do something permanent, something meaningful to honor Nathan's memory. Not just for him, but for me too. A way to carry him with me always, while also marking the beginning of my journey forward. I've never been one for tattoos. Actually, I used to be pretty conservative about body art, always thinking my designs should be in buildings, not on skin. But somehow, the idea of getting Nathan immortalized on my arm, a pianist at his grand piano, felt right. It felt like the perfect tribute to the man who taught me that both buildings and life should have soul. The tattoo studio was nothing like I expected. I'd imagined some dark, edgy place with neon signs and questionable hygiene. Instead, I walked into what could have been one of my own designs. Clean lines, natural light, and an almost gallery-like atmosphere. The artist, Anna, made me feel completely at ease as she looked at the reference photos I brought of Nathan at his piano. 6 hours later, I couldn't stop staring at my arm. The detail was incredible. Nathan's profile, his characteristic pose at the piano, even that slight smile he always had when he played. The pain was intense, but watching his image come to life on my skin was worth every moment. 2 weeks passed, and the tattoo healed beautifully. I decided it was time to visit Victoria and the boys. It was a typical Saturday afternoon when I pulled up to her house in the upscale neighborhood where she insisted on living despite her mounting debt. I wore a light blazer with long sleeves. The moment I rang the doorbell, I heard Lucas and Marcus racing down their curved staircase. At Victoria's house, Aunt Amelia, Lucas practically launched himself at me. At 13, he still hadn't outgrown his enthusiasm for family visits. Marcus, trying to maintain his cool 16-year-old demeanor, hung back but couldn't hide his smile. "Hey, Aunt Ames." Victoria appeared behind them, her real estate agent smile firmly in place. Perfect timing. I just made lunch. The house was warm, and I instinctively removed my blazer. I was wearing my favorite silk blouse underneath, and suddenly the room went quiet. Well, briefly quiet, before Lucas's excited shout broke the silence. "Whoa! Is that Uncle Nathan?" He rushed over to examine my arm. "That's incredible. Marcus, look, it's got his piano and everything." Marcus moved closer too, his teenage indifference forgotten. "That's actually really amazing, Aunt Amelia. It looks exactly like him." That's when Victoria's voice cut through the boys' excitement like winter wind through a poorly insulated house. "Amelia, what were you thinking? That's that's completely unprofessional. What will your clients think? I can't believe you'd do something so permanent without consulting anyone." I felt heat rise to my face, but I kept my voice as steady as the structural beams I design. "Victoria, I didn't need to consult anyone. It's my body, and I'm perfectly capable of making my own decisions." The look she gave me could have cracked concrete, but she held her tongue. We sat down to lunch at her oversized dining table, the one I knew she was still making payments on. While the boys kept asking questions about the tattoo and sharing their memories of Nathan's piano lessons, Victoria sat there radiating disapproval. Every time I caught her eye, she was staring at my arm like it was a design flaw in one of her luxury listings. I tried to keep the conversation light, telling the boys about Nathan's first attempt at teaching me jazz and how he'd eventually given up and said I should stick to architecture. They laughed, but Victoria just pushed her organic kale salad around her plate. Later that evening, it was around 8 when my phone rang. Eleanor's name flashed on the screen, and I knew immediately what was coming. Victoria must have texted her photos the moment I'd taken off my blazer. "Amelia." My mother's voice carried that special mix of disappointment and judgment she'd perfected over years of critiquing my life choices. "Your sister just sent me pictures of what you've done to yourself. I have to say, I don't approve at all. What will your clients think?" I took a deep breath, steadying myself like I would before a major client presentation. "Mom, I'm 35 years old. I run my own successful architecture firm. I don't need approval for decisions about my own body." She made that little clicking sound she always makes when she's really annoyed. Then, without another word, she hung up. The weeks after the tattoo reveal became a blur of deadlines and design reviews. I was leading a major sustainable housing project, which meant endless hours at my drafting table at home. It was almost a relief to have an excuse not to visit Victoria and deal with more drama about my tattoo. But eventually, the project reached the approval phase, and I couldn't avoid family obligations any longer. As usual, I headed to Victoria's house on Saturday afternoon. The moment she opened her designer front door, the one I'd helped her select when she first bought the place, I knew something was wrong. Her face had that pinched look it gets when she's about to start listing all the ways I've disappointed her. Lucas and Marcus were in the living room, working on their laptops when I walked in. They jumped up to greet me, but Victoria cut off their enthusiasm. "Boys, go upstairs," she said in that tone that brooked no argument. "I need to have a serious conversation with your aunt." They exchanged worried looks, the kind kids get when they sense an impending storm, and trudged upstairs. The sound of their door closing echoed through the vaulted ceiling. Confrontation. "What's going on?" I asked, though the tension in the room was as obvious as a structural flaw in a blueprint. Victoria crossed her arms and glared at me. "Do you know what Lucas asked me yesterday? He wanted to know if he could take piano lessons." Piano lessons. And then Marcus started talking about applying to architecture school. "Victoria, those are hardly terrible aspirations." I tried to reason with her. And when they're adults, they'll make their own choices about their futures, just like I did. Their own choices. Victoria's voice rose to match the height of her cathedral ceilings. They never talked about any of this before you showed up with that. That thing on your arm. This is entirely your fault. I took a deep breath. Come on, Victoria. Creative careers are everywhere these days. Half the homes you sell were designed by architects. The boys probably see successful artists and designers every day. You can't seriously blame me for them being interested in the arts. Don't you dare try to justify this. Victoria was practically shaking now. You have no idea what you've started. First, they'll want to pursue arts. Then what's next? They'll give up on business school. They'll waste their time on creative pursuits. And before you know it, they'll end up struggling artists. I stood there in Victoria's meticulously staged living room, feeling like I'd stepped into some alternate reality where being a successful architect was equivalent to being a failure. Victoria, this is absurd, I said, trying to keep my voice as level as my designs. I've won multiple design awards. My firm is thriving. I make more than enough to help you with your mortgage payments. You know all this. The breaking point. It doesn't matter. Victoria's face had turned the same shade as her overpriced accent wall. The fact is, you've changed. And I've been thinking about this a lot. She straightened her back like she was preparing to show a $1 million listing. I don't want you coming to my house anymore. You're a bad influence on my boys. I actually laughed. It was either that or cry. A bad influence because I'm a successful architect? Because I honor Nathan's memory? Victoria, do you even hear yourself right now? Don't mock me, she snapped. I'm serious. I want you to leave. And I don't want you coming back. This is insane, I said, grabbing my designer bag. You're making a mountain out of a molehill, and you know it. Call me when you've come to your senses. I walked out of her house that day feeling like I was in some surreal architectural nightmare. How had a tasteful tattoo honoring Nathan, combined with my recent success, turned into this family-destroying drama? At home, later that night, back in my self-designed home, I tried to process what had happened. Victoria had always been the more conventional one between us, but this reaction seemed extreme even for her. Still, I figured she'd calm down eventually. She had to, right? So I kept sending her the monthly mortgage payments, like I always did. After all, her financial situation shouldn't suffer just because she was being ridiculous about my life choices. But as days turned into weeks, something else started bothering me even more than Victoria's reaction. Lucas and Marcus hadn't reached out to me at all. No texts, no calls, no sharing of their latest design sketches they usually sent me. The boys who used to FaceTime me at least twice a week to show me their creative projects just disappeared. I tried texting them casual messages. Hey, how's that science project going? Or, did you finish that architectural model you were working on? But there was nothing but silence. It didn't take an architect's eye for detail to figure out that Victoria had probably forbidden them from contacting me. The thought of her using the kids as pawns in this ridiculous fight made my carefully constructed world feel like it was crumbling. 2 months later, 2 months crawled by. I threw myself into my work, took on more sustainable design projects, anything to keep my mind off the situation. But as Thanksgiving approached, I couldn't ignore the family drama anymore. Usually, Eleanor would have called weeks ago to coordinate menu planning, but this year, silence. She probably just forgot, I told myself, even though Mom had never forgotten to invite me to Thanksgiving in my entire professional life. Things have been busy for everyone. So I did what I always did, bought thoughtful gifts for everyone, including Victoria and the boys. I got Lucas the new drafting tablet he'd been dreaming about, and Marcus the professional camera equipment he needed for his portfolio. I even got Victoria that high-end smart home system she'd been eyeing but couldn't justify buying for herself. Loading up my car with the gifts, I tried to stay positive. Surely they wouldn't let my tattoo and career success ruin Thanksgiving. This was our family's biggest holiday. The one time of year when we all came together no matter what. Even 3 years ago, right after Nathan's death, when I could barely look at a blueprint, I'd still made it to Thanksgiving dinner. I pulled up to my parents' colonial-style house, the trunk full of carefully wrapped gifts. The familiar sight of Eleanor's Thanksgiving decorations, the same ceramic turkey she'd had since I was in architecture school, the autumn wreaths, the pumpkins on the wraparound porch, made me smile. But that smile faded when I opened the heavy wooden front door. The scene I walked into felt as wrong as a misaligned foundation. Victoria, Eleanor, Richard, and the boys were all there. But instead of the usual Thanksgiving chaos, there was this weird tension in the air, like walking into a poorly designed space where nothing quite flows right. They stared at me like I was an unexpected structural failure in their perfectly planned day. Amelia, Eleanor's voice had that sharp edge to it. "What are you doing here?" The Thanksgiving confrontation. I stood there, arms full of gift bags, feeling increasingly out of place in a house I'd grown up in. "What do you mean?" "It's Thanksgiving. I brought presents for everyone." We didn't invite you," Eleanor said slowly, like she was explaining a basic design principle to a first-year student. "We thought you'd understand that meant you weren't supposed to come." The gifts suddenly felt as heavy as concrete blocks. Understand? Understand what? Why wouldn't I be invited to Thanksgiving? Victoria stepped forward, arms crossed over her designer outfit. The kind I knew she couldn't really afford. That's when I noticed the boys weren't looking at me. They were staring at the floor, shoulders hunched like a collapsing structure. "Because," Victoria said, "we don't need you showing off that tattoo and filling my children's heads with more inappropriate ideas about acceptable career choices." I set the gifts down harder than necessary. "Are you kidding me? We're still on this. It's been months. It's just a tattoo. And I'm a successful architect." "Just a tattoo." Victoria's voice went up an octave. "It's a symbol of rebellion and unprofessionalism." "Oh my God." I ran my hands through my hair in frustration. "Are you all hearing yourselves? Uncle Robert has a full sleeve of tattoos. Cousin Rachel just got a massive phoenix on her back last month. Nobody said a word about those." Richard shifted uncomfortably in his armchair, but Eleanor jumped right in. "That's different, Amelia. You should have consulted us first. You know how we feel about maintaining a professional image." The confrontation escalates. I felt like I was trying to explain gravity to someone who refused to believe in physics. "Consulted you? I'm 35 years old. I run my own successful architecture firm. Why would I need to consult anyone about what I do with my own body?" "Because we're your family," Victoria shouted. "Because we have standards. Because decisions have consequences. The only consequences here are the ones you're creating." I could feel tears of frustration building like pressure on a failing support beam. "This tattoo means something to me. It's for Nathan. It's my way of keeping him with me, of honoring his memory." That's when Victoria said it, the words that would collapse our entire family structure. "Oh, don't start with that again," she sneered. "I never liked him anyway. Always showing off with that stupid piano, acting like some artistic genius, driving around in that pretentious car." She let out a harsh laugh. "You know what? I'm glad he got hit by that truck. Maybe now you'll finally grow up and start living in the real world." The room seemed to tilt on its axis. I could barely breathe, but I managed to find my voice. "Apologize," I demanded, my words coming out in a whisper at first. then gaining strength like a building rising from its foundation. Apologize right now for what you just said about Nathan. Victoria lifted her chin defiantly. I won't apologize for telling the truth. Mom, Dad, I want her out of here. She's ruining Thanksgiving. I looked at my parents, waiting for them to say something, to defend me, to scold Victoria for her cruel words about Nathan. Instead, Eleanor stood up, smoothing her expensive dress with trembling hands. Amelia, she said quietly, I think you should go. I stared at them all, my father avoiding eye contact, my mother's lips pressed into a thin line, Victoria's triumphant expression, and my nephews' confused faces. Without a word, I picked up all the gift bags I'd brought and walked out. Later that evening, the drive to the local homeless shelter was a blur. I barely remember handing over the gifts to the surprised volunteer at the door. These are all new, I explained mechanically. The drafting tablet, the camera equipment, the smart home system. Everything's unopened. Back in my modernist home, I sat in my dark studio for hours, thinking about everything. The monthly mortgage payments I'd been making for Victoria since her divorce. The Christmas traditions we'd started. Last year's trip to Hawaii, still fresh in my memory. Lucas's excitement when he saw the ocean for the first time. Marcus's endless architectural photos of the sunset. Victoria actually relaxing for once. I'd already booked the Europe trip for this year, planning to surprise them with visits to iconic buildings I thought would inspire the boys. But it wasn't just the trips. There were the regular shopping sprees for the boys' school supplies, the extra tutoring I paid for when Marcus struggled with calculus, the summer architecture camp fees, the monthly utility bills that mysteriously got paid even when Victoria was between real estate sales, and the college funds, 2 years of careful saving, making sure my nephews would have options when they graduated high school. I thought about Nathan then, about what he would say if he could see all this. He'd probably make some joke about poor structural integrity, then get serious and remind me that love shouldn't be a one-way street. Opening my laptop, I felt strangely calm. The email to Victoria practically designed itself. Victoria, I've had time to think about what happened today, and I've made some decisions that I want to communicate clearly. I will no longer be sending monthly payments for your mortgage and utilities. Since you feel I'm such a negative influence, I'm sure you wouldn't want to rely on my tainted money. The European architectural tour I planned for Christmas is canceled, at least for you and the boys. I'll be going alone to study the buildings myself. For the past 2 years, I've been setting aside money for Lucas and Marcus's college education. Given your concern about my influence on them, I'll be closing these accounts and investing the money in my firm's expansion instead. I hope you'll explain to the boys why they won't be getting their Christmas surprises this year. Feel free to tell them it's because their aunt's tattoo and successful career make her an unfit influence on their lives. Amelia. The next morning, I hit send and immediately turned off my phone. My hands were shaking, but my mind was as clear as my latest building plans. For the first time since Nathan died, I felt like I was standing up for myself, really standing up for myself. The next morning, I stared at my phone for a long moment before turning it on. The notifications started flooding in immediately. 37 missed calls, 63 text messages, 22 voicemails. The first message I opened was from Victoria. How dare you do this to my children? You have no right to punish them because you're mad at me. Call me back immediately. Then came Eleanor's texts. Amelia, this is completely unprofessional behavior. We raised you better than this. You're letting a tattoo destroy this family. Richard's message was shorter but equally guilt-laden. Your sister needs that money. Think about the boys. I scrolled through message after message, each one demanding responses, explanations, apologies. But none of them, not a single one, acknowledged Victoria's cruel words about Nathan or apologized for how they treated me at Thanksgiving. Around 2 in the afternoon, aggressive knocking interrupted my work on a sustainable housing project. I'd been trying to lose myself in the designs, but the sound of Victoria's voice through the door shattered my concentration. "Amelia, open this door right now." Victoria's voice carried through the hallway. "We need to have a serious conversation." I heard Eleanor chiming in. "Sweetheart, please, let's talk about this like adults." "I don't want to talk to any of you," I called back, my voice steadier than I felt. "Please leave. You're being malicious." Victoria's voice cracked with tears. "You're being vindictive. Think about Lucas and Marcus." Instead of responding, I put on my noise-canceling headphones and retreated to my home studio, leaving them to their dramatics in the hallway. Eventually, their voices faded away like the last echoes in an empty building. 2 weeks later. The next 2 weeks were like watching a poorly designed structure slowly collapse. Every day brought new attempts to break down my resolve. My phone became a battlefield of guilt trips and manipulation. Aunt Linda called. "Honey, family is everything. You can't throw it away over a little tattoo." Cousin Mark texted. "Come on, Ames. Just apologize and make this right. Family has to stick together." Uncle Peter tried next. "Eleanor is beside herself. Is this really worth destroying your family over?" Each time family was mentioned, I hit the end call button or deleted the message. None of them seemed to understand or care that I wasn't the one who had destroyed anything. I wasn't the one who had banned family members over body art. I wasn't the one who had mocked a dead man's memory. As Christmas approached, the tension ratcheted up. Every day brought new attempts at contact, each more desperate than the last. But Victoria took it to a new level when she ambushed me outside my office one morning. "Amelia, please, we need to talk," she called out, hurrying toward me through the light December snow. "I've been thinking about what I said about Nathan. I shouldn't have said those things. I'm sorry." I stopped, adjusting my portfolio case on my shoulder. The words I'd wanted to hear for weeks now sounded as hollow as an empty atrium. "Are you actually sorry, Victoria? Or are you sorry that I'm not paying your mortgage anymore? Sorry that the Europe trip is off? Sorry that the boys' college funds are gone?" Her face flushed. "That's not fair. The boys shouldn't be punished because of me." I laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You know what's not fair? You banned me from seeing them over a tattoo. You said you were glad their uncle Nathan died. But now that the money's gone, suddenly you want to make amends? The college funds," she said, her voice cracking. "You can't just. That was for their future." "You're right, it was. But according to you, I'm a bad influence. Wouldn't that make my money bad too? We wouldn't want my creative profession corrupting your children's futures, would we?" The confrontation continues. Victoria's face turned from red to purple. "You have no right." "No right?" I cut her off. "Those are your words, Victoria. Your logic. If I'm such a terrible influence that I can't be around the boys, then surely my architectural success and money would be just as corrupting. I'm just following your lead here. This is different." She exploded. "This is their education. No, this is the consequence of your choices. You can't have it both ways. Either I'm a bad influence and everything associated with me is harmful, or I'm their aunt who loves them and wants to help. Pick one." I turned and walked into my office building, stopping at the front desk. "David," I said to the security guard who'd watched over our building for the past decade, "my sister and parents are no longer welcome here. Please don't let them up to my floor." Christmas in Europe. Christmas came, and for the first time in my life, I spent it alone. Well, not exactly alone. I spent it in Paris, then Rome, then Barcelona, studying the architectural masterpieces I'd always dreamed of seeing with Nathan. I posted no pictures on social media, but through the family grapevine, I heard all about Victoria and my parents lamenting to anyone who would listen about their selfish daughter who abandoned her family over just a tattoo. But as I stood on a bridge in Venice, sketching the timeless architecture that surrounded me, I realized something. This wasn't about the tattoo anymore. Maybe it never had been. This was about control, about family dynamics that had been as poorly constructed as a house with a faulty foundation long before I got that image of Nathan inked on my arm. Epilogue. The day I returned from Europe, I did something I should have done 3 years ago. I made an appointment with a therapist. Dr. Martinez's office was warm and inviting, designed with the same attention to comfort and flow that I strive for in my own work. "Tell me why you're here," she said, her voice gentle but professional. I touched my tattoo absently, tracing the lines of Nathan at his piano. "I need to work through some things. Family stuff, mainly. And I need to figure out how to let go of someone I lost while still keeping his memory alive in my designs." She nodded, waiting for me to continue. "I loved Nathan. Still love him, I guess. But I know he wouldn't want me living in the past. He always said architecture, like music, was about creating spaces for life to happen. And for the first time since his death, I feel like I'm actually doing that, standing up for myself, making choices for me, not just designing spaces for everyone else while neglecting my own." Looking down at the tattoo on my arm, the image of Nathan at his piano that had somehow sparked this whole transformation, I realized something important. This wasn't just a memorial to Nathan anymore. It had become a blueprint of my own strength, my ability to stand up for myself, my willingness to design my life on my own terms. The Nathan in the tattoo seemed to smile back at me, forever captured in that moment of creative joy, doing what he loved. He'd always live in my heart, but maybe now it was time to see what other masterpieces life had in store for me.